Welcome to the Turnpike Sports Spotlight. Dave Weishaupt with you. I'm a big fan of fantasy sports. That's why I'm excited to talk to our next guest. He is one of the creators of something incredibly unique in fantasy sports. The name of the platform is called Units, and it's a real money daily fantasy contest. Use character-driven storylines and narrative. It's an amazing idea, and we're going to find out all about it because on the line we have the founder and CEO of Units, Torey Korsunsky. Torey, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
I think I told you off air, Units is an absolutely incredible idea. Tell us about the evolution of the platform. I mean, how did this idea come into being?
Yeah, absolutely. The original idea is, found myself ready to watch March Madness, excited for 4 days of basketball wall to wall, but like every year in the past, hadn't watched a second of college basketball and just didn't know where to turn my attention to, whether it's Grand Canyon University or Florida Atlantic University. And March Madness is known for these Cinderella runs where, little known players become national storylines. And I thought to myself, what can I give myself that creates a little bit of context behind the narrative, behind the person to understand who I should care about, who I should be paying attention to. And we just sort of iterated off that, how do you bring a little bit more context to a real money game in a sport that you may not be paying attention to on a day-to-day basis.
Tell me something about the company itself. I mean, who's involved with Units? Because quite frankly, I think it's one of the most creative fantasy sports sites out there. Tell me about the team that's involved with Units.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We've got an awesome team with great real money gaming experience, with great sports media experience. So it's myself, the founder. I've spent time at Creative Artists Agency on the merchant banking team called Evolution Media Capital, and was also leading growth at WSC Sports in the U.S. We've also got two folks from Buzzer on our team, the New York-based sports media company that shut down recently, and a couple folks from PointsBet as well. They were first and third engineering hires at PointsBet USA.
Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty about how you actually play on the Units fantasy sports platform, talk to me about the technology involved. I mean, I've been on some fantasy sites, and they're slow, and some are, really confusing to use. Tell us about Units, because from looking at it, everyone seems to be really raving about how great it is.
Yeah, we really made a strong effort to sort of distill down real money gaming to the simplest version that it could be. So we sort of pulled everything apart, took no preconceived notions about how things should look or exist, and started from the ground up, right? What if we could dream up our own daily fantasy app? What would it look like, right? And that's sort of what Units is this curated content, really easy to use interface, the ability to focus attention on one story at a time, and creating the sort of connection and community between players between players and fans to help fans understand, a little bit more about what's going on with the player, their personal narrative.
We've been hinting about it, and the one thing that really separates Units from other daily fantasy sports platforms is that you have contests based on trending narratives around players and teams and pop culture. Basically, what does that mean? I mean, how are people who play on Units using these narratives to play on Units?
Yeah, the idea is that we give people a little bit more context behind the players that they might not be paying attention to. I grew up in South Florida, and I'm a Dolphins fan, so I know what's going on with the Dolphins up and down, right? I know about Tua and Tyreek, but I don't necessarily know what's going on with the other 31 teams in the NFL. But I'm a sports fan through and through, and I just need a little bit of context to help me get up to speed and clue in on what's going on in the other games. I think you'd have to be living under a rock to have missed the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce narrative that's happening in the NFL. And we've sort of run with that, right? We think it's a really interesting narrative that could explain Travis Kelce's potential performance this past week, this coming week. And, he's got his new extremely famous girlfriend coming to watch him. Is he going to ball out and go off against the Jets, or is he going to have a quiet game and the moment's too big for him? Those are sort of the narratives that we're tapping into. And it's really about being fun and light and creating a little bit of connectivity between the players and fans that I mentioned before, right? Yeah. It's not super serious. You're not digging deep into the analytics. You're not going to run custom models or regression analyses to dive into whether or not Travis Kelce is going to have 70 receiving yards, but you can think about it from a more human perspective. How's he feeling coming into this game, knowing that it's a big matchup? He's got a special guest in attendance, things like that. That's just one example of a more tabloidy version of a story that we're running with.
I love the fact that you're combining sports, media, and daily fantasy sports. I'm curious, how often do you post your narratives on your site, which, by the way, is playunits.co?
So that's playunits.co is sort of like our website, but the experience exists exclusively in app right now.
Okay.
So you download units on the App Store. But we're posting stories every single day. You know, it's the best time of year for sports, in my opinion. MLB playoffs are about to start. We've got NFL in full swing. NBA training camps are about to open. NHL training camps are about to open. Champions League to start. We've got Ryder Cup this weekend. So, you know, it's really endless, right?
Wow.
We're posting stories, brand new stories every day, anywhere from 5 to 15, depending on how much content there is and how many great stories we think are worth telling. So we've got NFL up right now, college football. We've got some WNBA, some MLB. So we're trying to, you know, capture the best, most interesting storylines across the world of sports.
Yeah, I'm sure this is a new concept to a lot of people out there who play fantasy sports. I mean, you gave the example of Taylor Swift, and boy, were you thanking the sports gods that story came out. But give us another example of some of the narratives, because I just love how you're combining the sports and the narratives and fantasy sports. I mean, a lot of people, when they think of fantasy sports, they think of cold, hard numbers and stats, but I love the fact they're giving them something different.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there's such a wide range of stories that we can tell. I talked a little bit about the Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift one. It's really fun. It's really exciting. That definitely leans more into, like I said, sort of like the tabloidy, pop culture angle than it does, you know, pure sports, right? Another story that we've got up for Thursday Night Football, week 4 is a story about Sam Laporta, the tight end on the Detroit Lions. He's sort of come out and shocked the NFL. No one knew his name, but he's leading all tight ends with, you know, 60 plus receiving yards. And so we're just pointing fans to this storyline about Sam, which they may not be aware of. You know, he's on national TV for the first time, and it's like, hey, this guy's doing really great. You might not even know who he is, but he's kind of balling out and you should pay attention. So that's another example of a story that leans a little bit more into the football side of things, or the pure sports side of things.
You know, one thing I've learned from playing on other daily fantasy sports platforms is that a recreational player like myself, let's be honest, I don't have a chance to win big on those sites. I mean, most of the daily fantasy sports players that I've talked to and that I've interviewed, that have written books, they use some algorithm that recreational players just don't have access to. I mean, was that your goal in creating units, something that a recreational player can play and have fun with, and, you know, doesn't have to worry about the professional fantasy players who are churning out teams through these computer programs and things like that? Who was your main audience for units?
That's certainly a part of it. I think the more relevant and larger audience is all of these sports fans who are diehard NFL, NBA, MLB fans, but haven't found a real money gaming product that really suits their needs, right? Like you said, they're complex, they're hard to use, the games are being won by professional daily fantasy players. And so it's really about like someone who wants to express their interest in sports and their fandom in a new way, but doesn't know how. And we think that Units is a really simple, easy to use, intuitive product that sort of gets them over the hump and will open up real money gaming to a much wider swath of sports fan, not just daily fantasy player.
Walk us through what we can expect when we start playing fantasy sports on Units. I mean, when I get the app and I log on, what can I expect to see, and how do I start picking players? Give an example of how people would start playing on Units.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a really easy sign in process. Just for signing up, you get $5 to make your first entry. And the first thing you'll see is a set of cards, basically, and you can swipe through them. They have a title, they have game information, and then they have, 150 to 200 characters on the story, right? We've got a story about Jordan Love and his dramatic comeback last week. This is, we're talking week 3 of the NFL here.
Yeah.
That story about Sam Laporta that I mentioned, Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift story. And then you go into, NCAA football story about DJ Ugalele, Caleb Williams, of course, Shedeur Sanders after he had a tough game last week. So really just leaning into the biggest, most salient storylines and pointing fans in that direction. And so, you'll see a story read this sort of quick hit of content, and then you'll have a choice. Will Shedeur Sanders have 308 or more passing yards? Yes or no? So you make that selection. You jump to the next story. Story about Brennan Armstrong beating his old team last week. You make a selection. Will Brennan have 50 or more rush yards, right? And you might not have been paying attention, but it's a great nationally televised game on ESPN on Friday night. So that's sort of just the high level approach that we're taking, is pointing fans to the best, most interesting stories, creating that connection between players and fans, and then, letting them win money on top of that as well.
Now, where can people play on units? What states are you available in?
Yeah, we're in 19 states and Washington, D.C. So we've got pretty good availability. The biggest states that we're available in are Florida, Texas, California, Georgia, Illinois, North Carolina, and then a bunch of other smaller states as well.
I'm curious, you have such a unique platform. Was it difficult to get it approved in states? Because I'm sure regulators and state agencies have never heard of anything like this. Did it take more explaining on your part to get them to understand what units is?
I think to a certain extent there were some additional conversations about, why we're attaching original content into the gaming experience itself. But by and large, I'd say folks who were in charge of making these decisions were fairly receptive to what we're doing. And we make a conscious effort to not necessarily point a fan or a user in one direction or the other. We try to give a fairly even perspective on the player or the matchup or things like that. We offer a pro, a con, and make sure to keep sort of a balanced, even opinion of each story that we run.
Now, right now, what sports are you offering, and do you have plans on adding more sports as time goes on?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've focused so far on the major sports in the U.S. We've done we've done MLB, college football, NFL. We've just picked up some WNBA for the playoffs. I mentioned Champions League just started, so we're planning on running stories for the next match day coming up in a week and a half. We're going to pick up UFC for UFC 294, 295, and we really just work around user feedback. We weren't planning on running WNBA for the playoffs, but some of our early users were basically begging us for WNBA. And so we got up to speed, we added it, and there's some amazing storylines, and I've caught myself tuning into the WNBA playoffs when I might otherwise not have. And so it just really speaks to the power of the platform in its sort of earliest days.
Well, you mentioned user feedback. I mean, what has been the response for units? I know you just recently launched, but what has been the initial reaction for people who play on units? I mean, it's such an incredible idea, and when you talk about fan engagement, what better way to do it through a narrative? I mean, what has been the initial reaction from people who played on units so far?
The feedback's been, in aggregate, really, really positive. I think week 1, week 2 of being alive, we had to really explain to users why this approach is valuable, right? It's such a radical departure from a current daily fantasy experience where you have to go to other sources to make your picks. You're focused really on the analytics and the numbers behind things. And we're introducing a sort of new user where we're saying, hey, read a story, take 15 seconds to think about it. Consider the feeling a player might be feeling, the Travis Kelce narrative that I mentioned. Is he extra excited for this game in compared to the other games that he might play this season, right?
Yeah. Think
about it from that perspective, and then decide where do you think he's going to land in his yard total or having a touchdown or whatever stat player combo we choose to attach to the story. And so once we got over that initial hump of saying, hey, this is why you should value it, the feedback's been really, really positive, and people have started to get it. We've seen people who refer their friends all submit entries right around the same time. So we know that they're sharing screenshots, talking about it in their group chats. And we can see these packs of entries come in as people have discussions about the stories that we run. And that's exactly the behavior that we wanted to see. And so it's really, really encouraging that we're seeing this sort of organic engagement where people are sharing stories, getting their friends to talk about it, and then all collectively submitting entries right around the same time.
I'm here in New Jersey, and I can't turn on a television or a radio without hearing about fantasy sports and the deals that are being done with media companies. And quite frankly, the concept behind units would seem like a perfect fit with doing a deal with a media company. I'm curious if you've been approached by media companies, because it just seems like it would be the perfect deal and a partnership with units. It's such an amazing combination of media and sports and daily fantasy. I'm just curious about if media companies have even approached you.
Yeah, we've been in touch with a bunch of different media companies, definitely leaning more towards the, what I would call digitally native, very online focused publications, ones with big Instagram, TikTok, Facebook followings, and not the ones necessarily that are legacy print media or have cable TV networks or anything like that. I think it's much more in line with where we're headed as a business and our focus and frankly the target demographic that we're going after, which is a young modern fan that cares players than they do about teams, that's looking for a connection to their favorite players, that wants to know more about what's going on with them off the field, off the court, in a way that is honestly relatively new to fandom overall. If you look at the sort of history of sports fandom, where you used to, get the out of town scores in the newspaper, now you're getting highlights from all over the league instantly on Twitter. And so fandom is much more diverse and broad and player focused than it ever has been.
In the news, we're seeing professional sport teams or leagues making deals with fantasy sport platforms or sports betting platforms. Does Units Fantasy have any plans to pursue deals with sports teams or leagues, something like that?
Yeah, I think we'd look at everything. And one of the things that really excites me about Units over the long run is that we can become this destination for telling the best player stories across sports, whether it's college football, NFL, international soccer, it doesn't matter what it is. And so there's this angle where we could become sort of the outlet for players to better tell their stories, right? I don't think they'll ever be directly involved because it's real money gaming, of course, and there has to be some sort of separation.
Sure.
I do think there's a really interesting opportunity for players to better share their stories in a way that, they might do on NFL Game Day Morning on ESPN in a longer format. But I think that'll continue to evolve as well.
How about sports betting operators? Have you been in contact with sports betting operators, or have they been in contact with you? I know that a lot of them are doing these type of games, part of their sports betting platforms. Would Units be interested in doing something with established sports betting operators right now?
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting opportunities. One of the things that we think about for Units is that it can be perceived as an entry level or an educational platform for real money gaming. I think in some ways it is, and in some ways it's entirely different. But if that is the case, and we do end up becoming, the entry level destination for real money gaming, then it would make a lot of sense to partner with sportsbooks down the road and have someone graduate from Units into a regulated sportsbook in their respective state, where they have access to a wider array of lines and markets and market types. That's, a little bit less hand curated for them, and they're ready at that point to go and pick their own lines, pick their own things that they want to bet on. But for now, the idea that we sort of serve up all the best content and really make it really easy to play. Once we prove that out, then we'll start to explore some of those other discussions.
So tell people how they can start playing Units Fantasy Sports. Where would they go to download the app, and how they go about building their roster? Yeah,
so we are on iOS only right now. You'll go to the App Store, search Units. Should be the number one result. There are a bunch of unit converters as well, which we didn't account for when we named the company. But you'll download it. You'll sign in either via Google or via Apple, which you're most likely logged into on your phone already. So it's a really one tap to make an account. We have a quick onboarding experience to show you how to play, what you do, how you select your stories, how you make your entries. And then from there, you can start reading immediately. You can go see stories about the NFL. We've got Thursday Night Football, WNBA, MLB all going tonight. College football into the weekend, NFL on Sunday, of course. And you can pick anywhere from 2 to 5 stories, 2 to 5 players. And as you increase the number of players on your roster, your multiplier increases, right? So if you make 2 picks, you can win 3x your money. And if you make 5 picks, you can win 20x your money. And if you get all of them right, you get paid out. So it's a really simple game format, really easy to use, and we're trying to guide people through the experience with that original content like we've been talking about.
In terms of growth for Units, what are your plans for the future? Where do you hope to see Units in a year from now?
In a year from now, I'd hope we've had a great run through our first year of life. We have some metrics and targets that we want to hit in terms of user acquisition, monthly active users, overall revenue. But as we're sort of just getting our feet under us, I think we're still in the finding our footing mode and making sure that everything's working. The product doesn't crash on people, which it hasn't so far. And, in a year from now, I'd hope to have a much wider degree of coverage and have continued to roll out some what we would call more engaging functionality, where the platform feels more and more alive and interactive, and fans can connect with each other. Whereas right now, it's sort of a single player experience where you go on, you don't necessarily know that there are other people making the same picks as you or choosing the other side or anything like that. So there's a lot of stuff that we could do on the sort of interactivity front to make it even more fun to play.
Torey, we're running out of time, but can you give out a website where people can check out Units and where they can download the app? Also, if you have any social media addresses you want to give out so people can keep up with what's going on with Unit Fantasy Sports?
Sure. So you can go on the Apple App Store, search Units, will be the first result. And then you can also navigate to our website, PlayUnits, PlayUnits.co. And you can get a link to download from there as well.
Torey Korsunsky, founder and CEO of Units Fantasy Sports, thanks so much for coming on and telling us all about your incredible fantasy sports platform. I think Units is one of the most unique platforms out there, and I can't wait to give it a try. Thanks so much for coming on and telling us all about it.
Thanks so much for having me, Dave. Really, really great to be here, and excited to come back on in the near future.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you. That'll do it for us this week. We'll see you next time on The Turnpike.